My name is Paul Reid. Lots of people refer to me as Brother Pablo in the community. I was born, lived, worked, struggled, and I'm still here in Brixton, covering a whole range of different things, everything from school child right the way through to professional. So yeah, I feel like I'm part of the fabric.
Come on, man, you're part. So, what does it mean to belong in Brixton?
What does it mean to belong in Brixton? I think that's definitely going to be up for a discussion, a big discussion. But what does it mean for me? For me, you would have had to have lived, worked, played, struggled. You'd have to learn what it is to be here, what this means, and you'd have to have earned your stripes. I think there's one thing to be in Brixton, and then there's something else, which is to actually be recognised as somebody who is a Brixtonian. I think there's two different things. Lots of people come and go. And I can't tell you exactly what's the moment where that tips, but it is about journeying. It is about being part of something. And I think it's, in some ways, it's about proving that you haven't just come here to gain on its reputation on your way somewhere else. I think it's really about saying that you've come here to do something and you have to earn people's respect. This place has got a lot of grit. It's got a lot of great history. And so I think you don't just naturally acquire that status.
You know what I believe? I think it's language as well. I think you can hear it in someone's language.
Oh yeah?
If you belong in Brixton or been part of it or you've earned it. Because you'll see Brixton for me in one way, but then if you've been in Brixton, you understand the realities. So the reality, you can talk it much better. So, you know, if someone told me about stop and search, but if you've never experienced stop and search, then you could talk about it all day. But if you was a real Brixtonian, you really would understand.
And I think, you know, for lots of people, they get the headlines. For you to be Brixtonian, or to be Brixton, you have to also know the nuances and be able to criticise and critique the mainstream narrative.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we are it. I am it. Well, I know now. I'm Brixton. I didn't know I fit in life. And this is the next bit. The significance of Brixton to the rest of the UK, right? I didn't understand that dynamic until I started travelling around the country with my poetry, and I realised Brixton's significance is massive. But because we live in it, we don't see it the same way. But give me your input.
I think you're right. I think you can go to more or less any part of the world, as long as it's not some outback remote that's never heard of anything, right? But you can go to so many parts of the world, mention Brixton, and it resonates and it stands for something. Now, there might be a disconnect between what it stands for and the hardcore realities of it in 2019. But based upon its history and the great things and the not so great things that have happened here, it stands for something. And that standing for something, a big proportion of that has something to do with Brixton's black community and its African and African Caribbean histories. It's not always been, it's never been actually 100% African and African Caribbean, but I think because of what's happened here, you know, it sends out a beacon about what's possible. Most things that have happened here have been considered impossible, you know. Unreasonable, defiant, resisting, you know. I mean, even the senior citizens, are having to be assertive when they get on a bus. You know, they don't just queue up. They get on their bus, right? And there is something about the character of the space, which is confident, it's assertive, it's vibrant, it's dynamic, it's feisty. My earliest memories go back to my mother and father, obviously, and where we lived. We lived on Railton Road. We lived on Elm Park. And we lived on, first of all, we had a restaurant, and then after that, we had a takeaway. The takeaway was next to a gambling house. Yeah, our shop would open at 11 o'clock in the evening, and it would close at 7 o'clock in the morning. You know, we were in that world. You know, I was just eating a dumpling today, but I remember with dough this big having to make dumplings and scrape fish and this kind of stuff. My mum came from Liverpool. She married my dad, Jamaican, and in 1953 he came over here. He met my mum, who ran away from Liverpool, and we settled in Brixton. You know, so my memories go way back there. You know, and it goes back to memories that include things like the dice table, playing 79, poker, all these kinds of things, you know, sound systems, just the rich culture of what I understood life to be. It wasn't until as you grow up and you get older and you move out of Brixton, you realise that the UK isn't like that.
It's a big stream, wasn't it?
Yeah, you got to get out of zone 2 to work out what the rest of the world's like, right? And it's really interesting because obviously later on I become a youth worker, and I end up taking lots of young people out of the area so that they get a perspective. And one of the things that often happens when we was working with young people was, you know, we'd take them, for example, to, I don't know, Buckinghamshire or somewhere, right? Essex or Surrey or wherever it be. And there would be a kind of a reality check. Why are they looking at me like this? You know, why are they reacting to me like this? And a lot of the work was about supporting young people to appreciate that, you know, you're not in Brixton anymore. But also to appreciate that just because somebody's looking at you doesn't necessarily mean that we got a problem. Yeah. It could be curiosity. Because I haven't seen a group as large as this, you know, dressed in this particular way, you know, and obviously black young people I'm talking about. And so they didn't necessarily understand that dynamic. So there's a conversation, but we would have interpreted that conversation possibly as hostile. And so a lot of the work of a youth worker was about, you know, supporting young people to actually see themselves as global citizens, that they can go into any space and do anything. And there's a huge journey involved in that.
I'll now ask you another question. What was your first experience of local politics and community organisation?
Again, it goes, I mean, politics for me is about life. And so it goes back to some of my early memories, and where some of my early memories involved challenge. So, I don't know, watching Muhammad Ali boxing in our shop on a black and white television in a space that was full of a variety of different black people, from Trinidad, from Barbados, from Nigeria, from wherever, from Jamaica, from Britain, all in the same space, talking about boxing. That's an education right there. First of all, you've got to be able to appreciate all these different dialogues, right? But then there's also what's actually being said. And a lot that was being said was about racial politics. It was about, you know, why was Muhammad Ali so brilliant, for example? It wasn't just about his boxing. It was about his articulation around the issues that were important to us. So he represented us at the time, and he was saying things that we wanted to say, but possibly didn't even know how to say it, you know. And that's where I would say my early days of politics was really going all the way back as a child, just being exposed and immersed in us as a people.
It's funny you said it, because I think James Brown and Marvin Gaye did that to me as well. Not realising that it was political in a sense. I just felt they was telling my story. You know what I mean? I could recognise those words, right, and understand it.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand it was politics. I thought politics was something else.
Exactly.
That was addressing...
Well, we didn't like politics.
That was addressing my problem, you know what I mean?
We didn't like politics. It's like saying we don't like maths.
Yeah.
Until you realise you are maths.
You are the maths. You know what I mean?
Right.
We are the numbers that make these things up. So,
right.
So how do political movements, for example, and grassroots activities like... representing marginal groups evolved through the 60s. How do you think that worked?
Well, I mean, the 60s, when I think about the 60s, I think about the Black Power movement in the States, for example, right? But whilst that was happening, through my work at the Black Cultural Archives, I get to appreciate that you had Black Panthers in Britain. And we didn't know that.
I didn't know that one, you know.
No, neither did I, right?
Like, what is this all about?
It took me all the way, to have to get to be the director of the Black Cultural Archives. To find that out.
And it's what I didn't understand, because when I saw that for the first time last year, I was like, Linton Kwesi Johnson's in there, Darkest House.
Well, here's the interesting thing, right?
Wow, what a powerful group, man.
And so many of those people, we knew them, but we did not necessarily know them as Panthers. You know, Ansel Wong, you know, a whole Liz Obi, a whole bunch of people that we've got high regard for, And why did we have high regard for them? It's because they actually stood for something. They had values and principles in politics, right? And they also had relationships with each other. They had struggled together. So it took forever for me to kind of like, I even challenged that. I said, no, we didn't. No, we didn't.
Challenge it?
Yeah. I said, no, we didn't. Well, what kind of bogus panther movement is this? Right? I challenged it, right? Yeah. Because you're trying to make up history here.
Because otherwise we should have heard about it.
We're supposed to know about this.
And I'm not know about this. I'm like, hold on a second. And then I actually thought, was I being too militant when I picked it up now? Because I was thinking of like bringing that back to modern times and letting people know about this. And like, actually, we've been struggling to get a voice from the 60s and 70s.
Right.
Definitely a man of that intelligence, right? Was held back, and we've
Sure.
given American history, right?
Sure.
Don't you agree?
Exactly.
It's not my history.
But then when you really study it, and that's why that work at the BCA is so important, right, is because it then gives you an appreciation that we might be familiar with the 60s now because of what happened in the States, right? But when you connect with the whole Panther movement, you realize it was within a context and it had a history. And that history didn't start in the 60s. You know, we can talk about what was happening in the early 1900s, you know, and so on and so forth. So the appreciation of history, I think, is a really big deal because it talks about the ebbs and flows of what actually happened here, right? And the study of it then allows us to get the meaning from it so that we learn the lessons and maybe don't, you know, create the same kind of responses that don't actually lead anywhere. We can learn from it, right? So in terms of the question of like political movements over the time, well, first of all, it requires a historical appreciation, a historical context. And then from that, you start to work out how it all knits and stitches together. The 70s, what comes to mind in the 70s is the whole Rasta movement, you know, and dread. And this kind of, the version that we got wasn't necessarily Rasta, it was more dread.
It was dread we got.
Yeah.
That was something else.
Yeah.
I mean,
we got an anti-Babylon, you know what I mean, anti-establishment, resistance, fight back movement.
He was the first guerrilla, right? And or you might say the Rasta Dread was the man that kind of like we looked upon as he's the one that was leading the way when it comes to resistance.
I think what happened with us, certainly for me, because I was born in the 60s, so by the 70s, you know, you got me in my teenage years now, right? When you think about 70s to 80s, right? And so I'm open to new ideas. I'm open to who can articulate what it is that I'm experiencing and show some leadership. Because, you know, we needed guidance. And the dread showed us how to fight, almost physically. But the Rastaman gave us values and principles and spirituality. You know what I'm saying? Which came later on. So that period was important to me, I think, as I grew up. And then in the 80s and 90s, my work as a youth worker, into community development now, you know, and all of that work, African-centeredness, Pan-Africanism, all of that starts kicking in now. The trajectory was youth work. I mean, there's a common theme that runs throughout all of this, right? So there's youth work, kind of community development work. I then I became a problem for the youth service.
As you do.
In the work that we were doing at New Initiatives. And changes that took place in the 90s around the youth service and restructuring. That then led to me working with Jonah Greenie in the town centre office. And again now it shifts now, not so much youth work, but the kind of community development aspect now, and working in the town centre forums with about 3,000, you know, Brixton area forum members, with those different themes and groups that were like representing really important issues at the time. And that's when we connected.
Because I remember this is probably the first time that I saw marginalised voices can be represented at the table, whereas before I wasn't. What I was finding is that you'll talk to me and then you'd go away and go, okay, leave it with us and we'll do it. And I was becoming a bargaining chip for someone's political career or political positioning, right? So when I met you now through town centre office, and like you, I came through probation. I went youth service because my partner at the time, she was a youth worker. and youth service was slacking slightly, with allowing people from the road to be involved working with young people. So it gave me an input like you to go involved with the political side of things and take the gauntlet.
Yeah.
So it was really nice. So you were saying from that youth service, then you went into the
and each time I had a personal agenda. My agenda in the Brixton Town Centre work was for a forum that was going to look like the people outside the room.
Okay.
Most of the forums were the kind of, the same old suspects.
Yes.
People that were the movers and shakers, that knew the right people and got their thing through. The Brixton Town Centre Forum looked like people that were outside the room, right? It was much more representative. All the activists were in there, and we tussled with the decision makers.
Find you in the bars.
That's
on a
right.
Friday afternoon,
That's right.
You know what I mean? And
yeah.
a drink of us.
That's what it was about.
And we all had our little flipping, still had our little vices and
let's not get it wrong. I mean, there were issues and tensions, and it was difficult. Because as a council officer, there's a quite a difficult line to kind of walk, which is that you're part of the London Borough of Lambeth, but whilst at the same time you're part of the people, or certainly so there are many occasions where I had to kind of be really clear about what I stood for and what I'm about. And so it was in that context that we were aware not only of Raleigh Hall, the building that was derelict, neglected for 20 odd years or whatever in the town centre, but also that there was the Black Cultural Archives that didn't have a home, and that there was a whole history here of organisations that are trying to do something meaningful. So BCA and the project, the whole kind of the first National Black Heritage Centre in the UK, that there symbolised and stands for so much. And we only have to remember the launch. The launch event wasn't the opening of a museum or an archive or a library. That was a whole outpouring of a people that said something like, at last we have something of our own.
Yeah. I love that. For me, this is where this project started from. I remember when you were saying it's going to be open, I was like, I want to do a poem. You was like, come and do your poem. And for me, that journey, what that said to me is that for once we could take on a project from the beginning. It's like a degree, right?
Yeah.
We can take on a project and we can finish it and produce something of a standard at that level.
Right.
And it was a privilege to be on that stage for me personally.
Totally.
And to see the people swathed across the
thousands of people.
Man.
Thousands of people.
Proud of yourself that day, but
there are a few things that have happened in my life that I would have to say are absolute signature times in my life, right? Man. One is having children, being involved as a father and having children. Another one is getting married, And then the other things that really come to life for me is my work at Origin, my work at New Initiatives, my work at the Black Cultural Archives is part of that. And it sits alongside another major development that we don't really talk about too often. It's not necessarily on these shores, but this is about its international connections. The opening of the National Museum for African American History and Culture, a $600 million project in the United States of America that sits immediately opposite the White House, opened a couple of years ago. BCA is Britain's equivalent to that.
And that's the key, right?
And
it's in Brixton.
Right.
The home of it all.
Right.
And that shows the significance of it as the rest of the country and the world, right?
Sure. I mean, it hasn't got 600 million. It never has done. In fact, one of its issues was its struggles for funding.
Why is Why? What was the struggle? What was it?
I think it's on so many levels. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, does the business plan stack up? Does it work? Right? And so there's lots of assumptions that certain money was going to come in, and in some cases it did, and in some cases it didn't, But I can just say this, Mike. I went to speak to the director of a Jewish museum, just to get some kind of compare and contrast, yeah? And it was a very fascinating discussion. He asked me how many pages was our business plan. And I said it was about 85 pages and it had God knows how many appendices. And he says, that's your problem. He says, our business plan is a really small document. He says, we bought a patch of land. We bought a patch of land. We built accommodation. Some of that was luxury accommodation, some of that was flats. And it's the income from the accommodation that sustains the organisation's museum. And he almost said, he didn't say this exactly, but what I took away from that was that right now we still seem to be building projects without sustainability built in. And we still are to learn that sustainability is almost like a rites of passage for us.
Yeah.
I mean, I left the BCA because I realised that I didn't have the answers to that anymore. So I could build it, but the sustainability piece has to be done by someone else.
It's a really strange thing because even now, if I do a small project, it doesn't matter, and Charlotte would tell you this, I actually do think about sustainability.
Crucial.
I put merchandise in there, I put all these arms, all these different arms on it. It might not go nowhere, but the point being is, like you're saying, I'm practicing that concept in my head that naturally, if I think of an idea, I've got to think of sustainability of it all, or else why am I doing it? Because that's what they do.
Sure.
Any new project they do in the British in commerce, they have merchandise, they have been back up, they have workshops, they have all these consultancies and services and management. So that's what you say. We should be able to understand that.
Yes, and I tell you what, yes and no. I tell you the no bit of that. The work that we're doing is about the history of African and Caribbean people in Britain. It's British history. So why are we having to work out how many slices of cake we get out of a cake and how many cups of tea we have to sell? How many t-shirts, how many books we have to sell? When actually this should be considered as British history, and British history needs to be resourced. So it's a conversation with government. It's not necessarily a conversation that the community can answer on its own. And I think that there is the glitch in the whole thing. It has to be supported by government and it has to be supported by the community.
What you're saying is now, it's not about having marginalised groups being in a marginalised situation to be sustainable.
Exactly.
It's about bringing the marginalised groups into the national grid so it can be supported.
Sure, so that we're not set up to fail, but actually set up to succeed, set up to grow and flourish. And some of that is work that we have to do within the community. And that's not just about black community, that's about we as people. But because of where it sits within the kind of museums, libraries, and kind of that world, an archive world, and because we're talking about national, it needs to be funded nationally. Sometimes when we talk about Brixton, we talk about black, we talk about those kinds of associations, it gets us to almost triggers automatic responses, right? Almost stereotypical responses. And so I suppose what I was asking for is to dig deep enough to find some stuff that we've not actually, we might not even have heard before, and we might even be challenged by what we're hearing. I'll share just a little story with you, right? I remember a conversation that I had with two security guards at the town hall. And we were leading up to a presentation in front of cabinet members to get some funding for BCA, right? So I was there with my memory stick and I wanted this thing to go well. And I had a very, very important conversation with two security guards. One of them said, the black guy said, "So what is this?" And I tried to tell him, and he said, "I hope you're not going to tell that old story of no blacks, no Irish, no dogs." And I said, "Why are you saying that? I'm just trying to get this thing to work. Right? I want to see my PowerPoint up on the thing, right? Why are you bringing that, right?" And he said, "No, I just hope you're not doing that, right?" And I said, "Why are you saying that though?" He says, "Because that suggests that it was a passive struggle." He says, "Why don't you talk about the fact that we fought back, and we fought back fiercely?" He says that he remembers a flat that he was living in, and in the corridor were milk bottles filled with petrol. And his thing was, there's no way that this thing is going down without a fight. Now, I'd never heard that before. I'd never heard of milk bottles filled with petrol from that generation. That generation's always been
very passive and kept it to themselves,
it's
right?
always been depicted as a kind of almost apologetic generation, and that we came with the fight. Actually, no, right? So the nuanced stories, I think, are really important. And then the white guy in the story comes in and he goes, "Well, I hope he ain't going to tell that old story about white people as racist, because you guys were my best friends." And I'm like, whoa, here we go. And his thing was, he spoke about being inspired by music, by being inspired by fashion, that some of his closest friends, one of the friends that he still has today, all black people, right? And so I suppose I was trying to say, let's not do the same old thing. That was necessary. No blacks, no Irish, no dogs was necessary. But let's now tell some really interesting kind of layers to that, the complexities of that. For example, I mean, we might talk about Mary Seacole, right? The great and wonderful nurse. And you know, her in the Crimea and so on and so forth. But we don't talk about the fact that she comes from Jamaica, and that she would have been, where did she learn her crafts? You know, she didn't end up, she wasn't always rich. She didn't end up, you know, she didn't start out in the way. So where did she get this from? She ended up getting this from selling scallion and whatever on Crocus Bag in Coronation Market, no doubt. But we don't get that version. I'm not saying that I know that to be the case, but that what I'm saying is that putting all of that into context and telling the stories that we don't know, I think is really part of what I was trying to say. My aunt used to run a partner system. My father used to be contributing as he would be somebody that would have a hand. He would part of the partner process.
Could you explain that to everyone so they can understand? What does it mean by hand? What's it mean to start the partner group?
Okay, so a group of people get together and they start a partner. And the thinking is that we put our money in. We all put our money in, let's say every week or every month, but let's say every week for now. We all put our money in every week, and we take it in turn to take the total amount of money that's been put in. Yeah, and that's the thinking behind it. And the reason for that is that we weren't able to get loans from banks, and we needed to get a start, whether it be to get into the property world or to get into business. And so we had to rely upon ourselves. Where was the money going to come from for the deposit? Where was the money going to come from for the startup? So we relied upon ourselves. And the system was each person would take it in turn to pay, to take the sum total of what was collected during that time. And you might decide that, I don't know, that you're not going to take it this time round because you need more than that. So you're going to keep on. And so next time round, you'll take twice as much, because that's actually the amount of money that you need. So each contribution, each person's donation was considered to be a hand. That's a hand. And the system in itself was a partner system, or a partner system.
I love that system. I remember seeing it as a little boy. My mum would give money, and then sometimes I see her come out with this wedge of money, and you should do her thing, you know. And
where did she get that from? How did she get it? We pulled our resources together. We pulled our money together.
And it's a loyalty thing as well, isn't it? Because you can't just take your money and pull out, can you? It's
well,
you stay into
if you did, I mean, it requires, everybody has to complete the circle.
Yeah.
Because if you take, let's say for example, you put in £10 and you took out 100, and we didn't see you for the rest of the week, and we didn't see you for the rest of the year, and in fact you disappeared off the scene. You not coming back very, no. Because you're accountable, right? Because everyone's relying upon your ability to pay your hand. Everybody's relying upon you to pay your contribution, because I got plans too.
Yeah.
And people will fall out big time.
Big time.
If they didn't pay their money. You know, so, you know, this ain't a letter that you get from the bank manager.
Yeah. And you get the man there, them start the partner and them, they take
and they run with the money. Listen, they're gone.
So where they go with the money?
Right.
Oh man.
So and we'll all have those stories. I mean, I remember my auntie Lynette. She used to manage one of these systems, one of these partners, and I remember when she got broken into and when the money was stolen, and that wasn't very nice at all. So that caused problems.
It's a privileged position to have, though, isn't it? Because if you're a good partner and you do good hands, people want to be with your hand in there. They know, that system's in place.
Yeah.
It's what's the word am I looking? It's got credibility to it, right? So you just know, and some hands are hard to get in because of that credibility, because they just constantly keep going back and supporting each other.
Yeah.
I think it's lovely. It's almost like bank ratings, right? It's even better than bank ratings.
Right. And it relies upon trust and confidence. If I want to join a partner, one of the key questions I'm going to ask is who else is in the group.
Yeah.
And if I don't trust people in the group, then I'm not going to join it, because I know that there's potential problems here. So a lot of that